So one of the most colourful periods to wargaming in the historical era has got to be the Italian Wars. The wars that took place in Italy between 1494 and 1559. The transition from medieval into black powder, into the whole sort of English Civil War period. Fascinating one, incredibly colourful, and that's why I'm really excited when Warlord said would like to see the new supplement. So this is the new Warlord's Pike and Shotte, Death and Landsknecht book. It's the latest of the supplements. As I say, it's for Pike and Shotte, so that rule book which covers 30-year war, English Civil War, now the Samurai War, etc., and now the Italian Wars. Beautiful book, really nice indeed. So I'm going to have a deep dive into this and have a proper look at it, because there's some really interesting mechanics. And what I do like about this, the Pike and Shotte book, the Black Powder book, the Hell Caesar books, the rules set a sort of template, and then these supplements are a way of putting the flavour of the period. Now this is on pre-order at the moment. I believe it's due out next month. So thank you for Warlords for sending it to me in advance. I really appreciate it. They also sent me the Death and Landsknecht special miniature. This is Richard de la Pole, the last Yorkist. So as you would expect nowadays, comes in Warlord resin, a nice detailed model in the Warlord resin. Slight bend in his sword, but I think a bit of warmth should be able to get rid of that. We'll talk about his stats in the book, but talking about the book, let's have a look. So yes, let's take a closer look at this new supplement, Death and the Landsknecht. Start off by saying this is, as usual from Warlords, one of their very high quality books. The imagery in this, the layout, the design, just the sheer quality of this book for what, 20 quid or so, is pretty darn good, I think. And also I think it just stands out amongst a lot of rule systems, the quality that Warlords put into their work. So this is the front page, as you saw. Lovely imagery on the front there. You know, it's the thing that I think gets you most excited about this particular period, or it does me anyway, is just the colour. You know, it's such a colourful period to wargame. Brutal but colourful. So there again, there's a classic example of the beautiful pictures that are in here. Now I have to give a shout out to a friend of mine, Jack, who runs Outpost Miniatures. He, amongst a number of painters, was responsible for painting a number of the figures that are in this book, so good on you, Jack. Also, just, you know, again, you just see the number of people that are involved in creating these supplements. Now I know they've sort of been backed up for quite some time. I think at one of the Warlords events they talked about the fact that COVID put paid to their planned schedule of various supplements they had. But this one, you know, now they're popping out left, right and centre. So this is written by Charles Singleton. He does a nice acknowledgement and a forward here in the book, talks about his excitement in the period and all the people that helped him. So nice introduction to the wars. Now, one of the problems with the Italian Wars for this period is it's inordinately complicated. You think you got a grip of what's going on, and then suddenly it all changes. The sides are always changing sides. Different nation states are and dukedoms are changing hands. Allies that were allies one minute become deadly foes the next. It's extraordinary. So hopefully it doesn't need to be said, but this supplement is to support the Warlord's Pike and Shotte rules, which to my mind at least, are, I think, the best of the three similar rule sets that Warlords did: Black Powder, Pike and Shot, and Hell Caesar. I think Pike and Shot, for me, gives the best game constantly. I think I can't think of any bad game I've had here. So the introduction, Charles takes you through why this period is so fascinating. It's not just that it's colourful, it's a transition period from medieval time when the medieval knight in his plate mail and chain mail was the dominant player of the battlefield. The longbowman for the English was, the dominant weapon, to a period where infantry was king, gunpowder was king. You start to see the introduction of pike, who are lethal in defence and can deal with heavy cavalry to the heart's content, and artillery and arquebuses, an early form of musket, becomes absolutely widespread in this period, and that changes the face of the battlefield. Now, the pike was generally used in defence. One of the also very interesting things of this period is that the Swiss are not the neutral, cuckoo clock, chocolate loving, gold collecting countries that they are now. They were a series of cantons, semi-independent states, I guess, within the tiny Switzerland, and they were vicious. Their armies were renowned for out-and-out aggression. They didn't just sit back. Their pike were lethal in attack as well as defence, and that also changed the method of warfare through this period. You're going from Italy, which was a country earlier on dominated by the mercenary armies of the Condottis, who mercenaries who signed up for different different states within Italy, and then swapped sides left, right, and centre. And the war of the Condotti towards the end, sort of in many ways, became a very gentlemanly affair. Very little blood was actually spilt. Lots of money was spent. But the Italian Wars changed all that. It became a very much less gentlemanly war. So you've got the history through here, which takes you through the period itself. Again, look at those pictures. Fantastic. Really, really good. Shows you the map of Italy. Now, the first thing for those unfamiliar with this period is that Italy was not one country. It was split into a number of republics, duchies. There was the Papal States. You can see the massive Papal States dominating the central region, and the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily and also Sardinia was controlled by Spain. And it sort of it's the poorer end of Italy, still is to this day, but was always an area that other countries very keen to control. You also had the nation states or the states of Venice and Genoa, who as well as being Italian mainland republics, also controlled quite a lot of assets abroad. They had a maritime empire, particularly the Venetians, who were phenomenal for that. And of course you've got the Swiss up here, the border with the French here, and Austria, the German states up round there. So Charles takes you through the way that the battlefield had evolved through this period. As I just mentioned, it's generally the domination of infantry. Cavalry begin to play less and less of a role. Now there are some notable victories early on for heavy, effectively knight-armed cavalry, but as the period goes on, they're less and less common, and cavalry charges are generally met with not a lot of success. You've also got an anathema for this period, and some people would be surprised if they don't know about this period, was the popes. As well as having that large central kingdom, the popes were not the sort of godly men we expect today, old men. Well, they probably were godly as well in their own mind, but they were also rulers in their own rights, and they weren't afraid to get stuck in. So it's notable that a number of popes were very active in this period in terms of fighting, not personally, but in terms of having forces involved and being prepared to join the major powers for and against in the fighting in Italy. So the next thing Charles does with the supplement is take you through the, and he's done a pretty good job of trying to get a grasp on the sort of intrigue and the different phases of the war. You've got the different invasions that take place. So starting with the invasion by the French, Charles VIII, who overruns Naples. And then is forced to retire because of a confederation of Italian states who come together to try and deal with him. Now, while he wins those battles, there's a series of ongoing battles, which means he has to evacuate Naples. Then you go through the Second Italian Wars, which was the War of Louis the XII. Another French invasion through into northern Italy, and that's the nature of all these battles. It's very much the major powers of the day, the French, the Spanish, the imperial forces, basically Germanic forces, all using Italy as a sort of playground to fight out their personal attempts to get cover, to get extra wealth and property and territory. Then there's the phase 3, which is the War of the League of Cambrai. Again, unless you're really into this, you don't really necessarily need to know that. The Fourth War is covered, which is basically heading into the 16th century, so 1521 to 25, which is yet another French king, this time taking on the Spanish, the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, again fighting it out in Italy. And then the last two phases are phase 5 and phase 6, which again are continuations of the various struggles between, well, by that stage, Spain and France fighting it out for control of Italy, and the Italian states bouncing between the two of them. Actually, I'm lying. There's two more phases. There you go. This is how complicated it is. The wars basically are concluded. The wars of the Italian wars are concluded around about 1559, with finally the ground settled in Italy. But what's interesting about these last two phases is they're not all taking place in Italy. So the 7th phase, the Fourth Habsburg Valois War, takes place in modern day Flanders, which is gives a bit of variety in their armies and the settings for the battles. Now it talks about here the Bad War. The Swiss were the excellent infantry of the day. They were the soldiers par excellence, as he says here, and the Landsknechts were created to try and counteract the power of them. They were very similarly trained, they were very similarly sort of organised, and there was no love lost between the two sides. In fact, the Swiss were notorious about not giving any quarter after victory, and they would freely massacre everybody they got their hands on. Anyone who surrendered or the wounded, anybody else that was in the vicinity, they would slaughter them. And quickly after that, the Landsknechts also took on that same kind of mentality. And so there was a great deal of hatred between the two sides. I'm not sure any war is a good war, but it was certainly classed as a bad war. Here's the historical timeline, always great to see. Now it talks next about the troop types, the different troop types that dominated the battlefield. It's, again, as I mentioned before, it's a transition period. Early period, you're talking about still bows and crossbows being in use, particularly crossbows. There weren't so many longbows by this period. That then changed to arquebuses, which is, as I said, an early form of musket. Now the crossbow was a very easy weapon to use, but it was a very hard weapon to produce. So the reason why arquebuses became more popular is they were cheaper to mass produce. So and also their ranges were considerably further. so they could they could bring down a charge of cavalry, for instance, very, very easily. However, they were a very slow rate of fire and very complicated. It says here the French infantry training manuals for the 1540s indicated at least 16 drill moves to load an arquebus. However, in the heat of battle, this was likely reduced to 3: load, present, and fire. But 12 to 14 rounds an hour was considered good going. So not 6 shots a minute or whatever it was in the Napoleonic time. So had the limitations, and that's where the pike come in, because you needed to back up for the arquebuses. They weren't fast firing enough. They weren't reliable enough to be solely there on their own fighting it out. So then you've got the pike. We talked about those earlier. They had become the dominant force of the battlefield. They'd basically they meant that cavalry couldn't charge into infantry as easily as they used to be able to. But there was also limitations. So you also saw the fact that 2 pike blocks going up against each other became just a push and shove. So the Swiss and also other nations started to use other troops. So you had the halberdiers and guys with 2-handed swords and those sort of things who had a role to sort of try and who would once the 2 sides were met, they'd sort of try and get round and cause mayhem in the opposition pike units and break them down. However, in fact, those troops were called the Zweihandlers, 2-handed swordsmen, or the Doppelsolden, which literally meant double pay men. And they got double pay for a simple reason, is their life expectancy was bleak. So they got extra money, they didn't get long to spend it. So then you've the next section talks about mercenaries. As I mentioned, the Condotti period, which was slightly before this, was the dominant period in Italy at that stage, where primarily, initially at least, soldiers who were left over from the 100 Years' War on both sides, French, English, Aragonese, various others, Gascon troops, even Burgundy soldiers who were basically dismissed after the 100 Years' War finished, went to seek their fortune, I guess, down in Italy, and the Condottis were the upshot of that. They were still around during the early period in Italy during the Italian Wars, but didn't have quite the same punch. But mercenaries certainly were very important. If the Swiss, for instance, were hired extensively across multiple countries' armies, the Landsknechts were also, they became almost exclusively mercenary troops for hire right across the piece. Then you got the talk about the horse. Mentioned before, the knights of old were no longer the dominant force, but there still were plenty of them on the battlefield, and in the right opportunity they could be devastating in the charge. The French had the famous gendarmes, but every nation had some form of heavy cavalry supported by what were called archers, but they weren't actually archers. Again, I think this goes back to the earlier period where each knight or men-at-arms had an assistant who often was an archer that rode with him. By this period they weren't archers anymore, they were effectively slightly lighter armed men-at-arms, and so they feature very heavily in this period. You also get the reiters coming in, which are pistol-armed medium cavalry effectively, and they, much like the arquebusiers, they used a form of rotating fire. So they would fire their pistols, then retire, and the next rank would move forward, fire their pistols, etc., etc. The Carrico method, which those who follow the English Civil War period will be familiar with there. And then, of course, you get the Stratiots, who are originally used exclusively by the Venetians from their foreign empires in Albania. They were effectively, I guess, scouts and hit-and-run artists. They were mainly there for the loot, but also had a very savage reputation. Then the Spanish armies had a very similar troop type called the Janitors, who were originally Moorish light cavalry, and then the French had their own version of it later on because they lacked the light cavalry that other sides had, and you need light cavalry for scouting and skirmishing, etc. Artillery, clearly a very important part of all the armies of this period. The French, particularly in the early and mid period, had huge amounts of artillery for their day. Now, it wasn't very mobile, so one of the rules in this book is very limited mobility. So the way they suggest is that artillery, once deployed, heavy artillery, normal artillery, once it's deployed, can't be moved again, which I kind of like as well as a rule. But there are light guns as well that we use to keep up with the infantry and provided some degree of mobility. But you're not talking the horse artillery of the Napoleonic period whatsoever. Then there's a whole section on the various leaders. There's all the French leaders there from Charles the Eighth through to Louis there, some of the great Italian families, the infamous Borgias, if you remember that TV series, if you're old enough. Crikey, that was a good thing for a young boy. Italy and the Swiss Confederation, some of their leaders, then into the Holy Roman Empire in Spain, to give you a bit more flavour of it. There's also a nice section here about how the Landsknecht regiments were raised. And here is, if you bought the book from Warlords, you would have got the special figure, which is Richard de la Pole, better known as the White Rose. He's a special character in the book. He was actually the last active Yorkist claimant to the English throne, who fled to Europe towards the end of the War of the Roses because so many of his relatives were being executed. He just thought, get out of Dodge for a bit. He first of all worked with the French, basically with Louis the 12th and then Francis the First, because he always hoped that he could get support to invade Britain and reclaim the throne for the Yorkists. However, unfortunately for him, he died fighting with the Landsknechts of the Black Band. How can you not be excited about a unit called the Black Band at the Battle of Pavia in February 1525? So his special rule is any unit joined by Richard receives the Brave special rule, but can only be used once per game. He's a command rating 8 and costs you 55 points. Now, lot of special rules, and one of the things I like about these supplements is that that brings you the flavour of the period by giving you some slightly different rules from the standard, and that's what makes all the difference. You've got the bad war special rule, which is free to both sides, which basically means whenever Swiss go up against Landsknecht, they get to re-roll any failed hand-to-hand hits in each and every round of combat. It's going to be brutal. They don't like each other, basically. You don't have to use any of these rules if you don't want to. There's also one of the things the Spanish towards the end of the period instigated was controlled volleys. It wasn't quite like Napoleonic volleys with muskets because, as established, the arquebuses are very slow to reload. But it gave the Spanish a degree of control with their firing, which in many cases was able to stop mass pikemen in their tracks. It's only available to Spanish arquebus armed infantry within the Spanish or the imperial armies. It means you can fire controlled volleys at any time, providing you don't move in your own time and haven't fired and not firing closing or traversing fire. A shaken or disordered you can't use controlled fire either, but first fire does stack with controlled, and it can be used as a charge response. So if you're being charged, you can fire a controlled volley or controlled fire. I keep saying volley, but it's not really. A large pike block or massed pike block that is disordered by controlled fire cannot sacrifice the casualty to hit to cancel disorder. Now, I read that and I'm like, what the hell? I didn't know you could sacrifice a casualty to cancel disorder. You You can't normally, but you can in this supplement. We'll get onto that in a bit. It's a bit later in the book. A unit disordered by controlled fire as part of the charge response is stopped at the point where the firing takes place and cannot continue the charge. Now that's a big difference from the standard rules. In that, if you get disordered by closing fire, you still carry on into contact, but you fight obviously a negative. If you are being hit by controlled fire in this book and you get disordered, you stop in your tracks, you don't go anywhere else. Other thing which I really like is they call it composite formations. So the most pike cavalry would have more armoured, heavily armoured troops in the front ranks and lighter armours at the back. And so they do that with this composite formation option. So you can have cavalry with your gendarmes, the really heavy, all armoured, got horse barding on in the front ranks, and then slightly lighter armoured cavalry behind. Similarly with pike, you can have armoured pike in the front and slightly weaker ones at the back. Now, it's quite clever how this works. You fight with the fighting qualities of the front rank guys, the more heavily armed, better qualified fighters, until you become disordered or shaken, at which point you fight with the stats of the rear ranks, which is quite straightforward. So that's kind of fun. I like that. Now this is the big change in these rules, which I think is going to excite a lot of people, probably put a few people off as well. People don't like change after all. But they have a new rule called, or new formation called the Swiss and Landsknecht Kiel formation. What is the Kiel formation? It's effectively massed pike blocks. So because pikes were so dominant in this period, and because they were so ubiquitous, I can't say that, they brought in a rule for the game where you can mass, if you've got this option, if you are Swiss or Landsknecht, you can mass your pike into massed pike formations. So the example here, you've got at the bottom of the page, you've got them 2 pike blocks, even up to 6 pike blocks, all crammed together into one formation, which is amazing. Now, if you've got with them missile troops as part of it, they can still form a sort of screen in the front or to the flank of the formation. But basically, this block moves as one. The benefit of this is you can form it at any, so you can form this at any point. It costs 1 order, and if the pike blocks are within 6 inches of each other, they can form up into this big Kiels, and from there on they move together. So you roll for activation, so you get 2 moves. Your first move would be form up, and then your second move would be move forward as normal. One of the things, once you've formed the massed formation, you get 1 free move even if you fail the order. Now I'm assuming that a blunder overrides that, but basically unless you roll double 6, it means you are going to guarantee to at least 1 move with a massed pike block. However, you can't turn to the flank or the rear, and also you have to maintain moving forward in your front arc for at least 1, so you can't do more than 1 outside of the front arc move in your move. So if you get 3 moves, you can move slightly to your left or right with 1 of them, but the rest of them have to be straightforward. Can't do anything else. However, you get hit in the flank, you can turn to face them, but there's various rules about changing to face and what have you. It does also have the hedgehog rule that is the main in the main pike and shot rule, which basically covers the fact that if you are charged by cavalry or any sort of missile troops, arquebusiers or crossbowmen close to the pike, they can run and get into the pike block effectively, and shelter from them means the cavalry can't charge home against them. Everything in the pike formation, this dense ice formation, gets a +1 morale save from shooting, including from artillery, and from hand to hand. So you get your enhanced armor, basically, a bit like Napoleonic. In the Napoleonic book, there is a similar thing for attack columns. They get +1 on their morale saves, and it's the same for these massed pike blocks. Also, each individual pike is treated separately for combat, so they support each other in the same way as before, and indeed 2 or 3 of them could actually be fighting as well. So as an example here at the bottom, you've got A versus 1 and B versus 2, and in both instances they're going to get supports from the guys behind. Obviously not the 3rd rank, because supports only work on immediately behind and immediately to the side, but all of those first 4 would all fight. All pike blocks can countercharge if they wish in these rules, in the same way that cavalry can. Now again, this matches the more aggressive approach of pike troops in this period. So you can countercharge, which means if you're being charged with cavalry, you can stand to receive it, or you can just go and have at it, which is kind of interesting. However, it's not all good news. If you're shot at, the target, the army firing at you, gets +1 on their hits. It's very hard to miss these mass pike formations. The keel has to be made up of troops from the same battalion, so you can't mix and match. They have to be the same one. So that may limit what you can do depending on the size of the battle you're fighting. Should any unit suffer from disorder in this massed formation from shooting, terrain or break test, then the whole formation is shaken, is disordered, sorry. So yeah, that's kind of important. But one of the really good thing for the guys in this big pike block, this keel, is that you could share casualties across the whole piece. So in this example at the bottom, where you've got, say, Unit 1 takes 5 casualties, you can put 1 on them and 2 on the 2 supporting, or you could put 1 on there if you know, you could even put it on 4 and 5 if you wished, 4 and 6 if you wished. So you can share the casualties out amongst the deep formation, which possibly allows you to survive longer. So one of the interesting things about the keel, which I'm very interested in, is that should any unit in the block, in the big pike formation, suffer a disorder from shooting, terrain or break tests, then the whole formation is impacted by it, so that the entire thing becomes disordered. However, if that disorder was given to you by anything other than Spanish controlled fire, terrain or the hand-to-hand combat, you can exchange 1 disorder for a casualty marker. Now bear in mind, you can also share that across the formation, so it means it's a way of basically exchanging the casualties, or fatigue I guess they would become in this case, for order in the block. So you'll get extra casualties on there, but it means that you can shake off a disorder when you most need to, which is interesting. But the only time you can't do that is when that extra casualty makes one of the constituent units shaken. So you can't sacrifice a pike block, for instance. You could have one at the back and say, right, I'm piling all my casualties onto that block to keep the front ones in good order. You can't do that if it would make them shaken. All attacking enemy troops who aren't themselves pike blocks lose their +1 to hit modifier for the charge, even if they're charging into the flank or rear of this pike formation. And that's to represent the fact, in reality, what happened was the outer files would actually turn to face a threat. So even though you're getting them in the flank and they would fight with the negative of being hit in the flank, you don't get the charge bonus for that. Also, the entire formation moves in the same way. So if you get on the, say you lose the morale, use the melee, and you have to do a break test and you have to retire or heaven forbid break, the whole lot goes, not just the ones involved in combat. The whole formation is broken, the whole formation falls back, whatever the result is. Now you don't have to play this formation if you want. You can just take the standard Pike rules within the rulebook and not play with the massed keel rules here. But I think if you do, you're kind of missing some of the fun of this. So I certainly will get my Landsknechts and my Swiss blocked up en masse to go punching into the enemy. It's all or nothing. If it goes wrong, you're in trouble. But if it goes well, things are looking rosy. Other things here for the Pike block rules, you can have integrated crossbowmen or arquebusiers. They only have a shooting value of 1, but basically they are treated as sort of attached skirmishers, light infantry that come out of. They can't be targeted themselves, but they are part of the block. You probably represent them with a rank of arquebusiers or crossbowmen, either in the front or the back, just to denote the fact they're there. You can also, as mentioned, you can have swordsmen or halberdiers who represent those double paid guys who rush forward and carve their way through the opposition pike blocks. They add an extra dice to the combat value of the pike block during hand-to-hand combat, and in addition may force the enemy to take a -1 penalty for any morale saves. This combat, it can only be used once in any combat in each melee, but either in the first or the second round of combat. So basically, if you're using the second round, it would be effectively they've held and waited, and then they rush forward and have a bout with their two-handed choppers. You also have, for the Landsknechts and later Swiss only, a blood flag. So this simulates a death or glory charge led by the Doppelsoldater. The unit gains the ferocious charge rule in the first charge of the game and allows the whole keel to re-roll all missed combat rolls during that charge. However, in the first round of hand-to-hand, the charging unit's target gets +1 combat result bonus. So I guess that's to denote they lose all semblance of formation and they just go for it. The Spanish had a slightly different take on how their formation should be, and that's the colunela. They learnt from some of the early engagements that their infantry, which didn't have an awful lot of pike, needed to be changed, and so their units were made up of a mixture of 50% pike, 33% swords, and 17% arquebusiers. Which gave them much more flexibility. So they have the opportunity to have extra arquebusiers built into their formations. They have disciplined shooter rule if you wished. So basically that's like if you play English Civil War and you have your pike blocks and you have musketeers on the wings. This is a similar kind of thing for the earlier period that the Spanish instigated. You can also have stubborn. They can have sword and buckler men going forward and upgraded to steady, etc. Superbly drilled. Number of options here. There's also this book also covers the Swabian Wars, which was basically the last attempt by the Habsburgs to take control of Switzerland. Didn't go so well for them, and within that there's a whole series of army lists there. You could also, if you're fighting the German peasant army, peasant rebellion period, you can also have war carts. So there's various rules for that here as well. Next up, there's a very handy page actually, is on the which I wish was in the main rule book. Actually, I'll be photocopying this. Just gives you a breakdown of all the different things that happen with different terrain, from minor obstacles, and so I like this. It gives you that breakdown, which I think is very good indeed. There's also a number of the battles in this period were dominated by sort of field fortifications. So you've got rules here for chevaux de frise, stakes, pits, all sorts of mantles and purveyses if you wish, and the effects are all listed there. Purveyses here, palisades here, turf banks, trenches, all sorts of things. and the points cost that goes with them. There's also something for prepared earthworks, which again were a large part of this period's battles. There's a number of the scenarios in the book also feature these, so it gives you the various impact of those within any game. So then you're on to the army lists. So very standard format. You have a breakdown of the forces involved, how many you're allowed, etc., etc., and their troop types. So what they've done though is, if you want to field your halberdiers as separate units, or your swordsmen as a separate unit, and not just integrate them into the pike blocks, there's rules for that here. So that gives you the unit costs and the troop types below. Similarly, if you want to dismount your gendarmes or your men-at-arms, as happened in a couple of battles, there's stats for that. And now there's also something on skirmishers. Charles in this book says that skirmishers weren't really a thing in this period, but if you have need to do it, he's included some skirmisher troop types. They don't feature in any of the army lists, but if you want to do that, then that's fine. And here's the optional artillery rule, which basically says guns of the period have very limited mobility. Once deployed on the battlefield, they were rarely redeployed during fighting. Therefore, you can introduce the following rule if players agree. Once artillery is deployed on the battlefield, other than to pivot its frontage to aim at a target, it may not move. Then you've got the Italian forces. So this is Italian armies. Again, fairly standard format. You've got your commanders and their costs here. You've got the horse types. Tells you if you're playing the Milanese, you can have 2 of these sort of knight heavy cavalry here in your army. If you're playing any of the other Italian states, you can only have 1. Gives you the stats. There's condotti, some skirmishing light cavalry, mounted crossbow and arquebusiers, etc. there. Then there's your foot militia, mainly militia crossbowmen, skirmishing militia. Having said there's not any skirmishers in this, there are in the Italian force. They're slightly different. Mercenary pikemen, which can only be used if you're doing a Florentine and a papal army, and various upgrades, and then your artillery. There's also the special characters, special personas here. So you can see that there's 2 here for the Italian forces should you wish to use them. Venetian armies are slightly different because of their international feel to them. So again, you've got the breakdown, you've got stratiots here, light cavalry, who have the fire and evade rule, javelin armed, skirmishing light cavalry. You've got, again, different types of infantry that you're made up for, and again artillery here. They've only got 1 special character. Here. He's a pretty hard nut. Any battalion that he joins may make a free move. If he leads that unit into combat, then that unit gains the tough fighter special rule. Very nice. Then there is also a separate list for the Venetian overseas territories, which is a bit less heavy, should we say. You've got more stratados. You've got city militia rather than other mercenary troops there. So again, you can just do your flavour. Then you've got the French, the superpower of certainly of the early phase of the war, early and middle probably. You've got the gendarmes, who are the queens of the battlefield, shall we say. Heavy horse, lance, mace, sword, combat of 9, morale of 3+, stamina of 4. They have heavy cavalry 3D and are elite 4, but they cost 64 points each. You've got the archers, which, as I said, you could compose a unit, mix a unit between the 2 if you wished. So you can have front rank of the heavy stuff and then the archers, the ordnance in the second rank if you wished. Lots of infantry, pike here, French infantry, which have crossbows and or arquebuses if they wish. You can hire Swiss pikemen into your army, who are particularly vicious. You can give them the eager rule if you wished. Again, you've got the mixed opportunity here to put armoured front ranks if you want. Swiss crossbowmen and arquebusiers there as well. Italian allies, stratidots, more Italian arquebusiers. You could get some Landsknechts if you like. I don't think they can be in the same battalion as the Swiss, because they hated each other. And then you've got the French artillery. Their special character is Gaston de Foix. He has the special rule of any unit of gendarmes led by de Foix becomes rash, and all other units become eager. He wants to get in amongst them. Spanish army, again, same sort of composition. They don't have such heavy knights. Their knights are not quite as heavy, but you probably get more of them as a result of that. You've also got you also have the Spanish infantry, swordsmen, as well as being pike, which is pretty vicious. You've got Italian armies, Italian allies as well, Landsknechts as well for them. There's their ordnance, and they, in certain cases, can have war carts as well. They've got a couple of special characters here, which, again, you can use if you wish. They're quite expensive, so you may not want to. Another amazing picture there, and then we're on to the Swiss. Swiss, much more limited in forms of their forces availability. It's basically light horse. They can, in certain circumstances, have mercenary Milanese men-at-arms with mounted men-at-arms knights as well if they want, but basically it's all about the pike, backed up by halberdiers and crossbowmen, arquebusiers in the Swiss army. They didn't have much artillery. Towards the middle period they had a bit more light artillery which supported them, but basically they didn't have the big field guns that the other nations had, and that did give them a few problems, although they were so aggressive they didn't really need it. So you look at the pike block stats. They have a hand-to-hand of 7, most troops have 6, and morale of 4, stamina of 4 instead of 3. And they're elite 4+. They have hedgehog and ferocious charge, 44 points. That's before you take any of the extra upgrades here if you wish to. German armies, these are the Holy Roman Empire forces later on, very towards the sort of second half of the Italian Wars period. Again, very similar kind of formation. You've got heavy knights, slightly less heavy knights, and then you've got reiters, which are the pistol-armed medium cavalry, skirmishing cavalry as well. Landsknechts form the sort of core of the imperial forces, although there's also options for city militia and also Italian allies if you wished, including some stratidots. They also have quite a lot of artillery. Characters, they've got Maximilian I and Gotz von Berlingenhof. I can't even pronounce that as their characters, which is, again, gives you that flavour. There's a bit of talk about the black bands. They're one of the famous, if you like, bands of Landsknechts in the period. Everyone imagines they are black, uniformed in some way. In fact, I think I did that as I knew, and as he says here in the book, there's no actual evidence that they were dressed in black. Most troops of this period dressed in very colourful garb because it was a way of showing their wealth. Their clothes were very much booty and very much very expensive. So the Landsknechts and the Swiss and everything else, when they got a chance, they were flamboyant because it was a way of showing how good they were, how important they were, and how rich they were. So they probably wouldn't have gone for black. So, as Charles says in the book here, probably the black bands were probably wore black armour rather than black clothes, which is probably where they got the name from. But hey, we're wargamers, we like black units, don't we? And then if you want to do the peasant uprising of the late 15th and 16th century, there's various army lists here for that. Steel Fist do some very nice figures for this period. If you're interested, again, they've got pike and very little infantry, very little cavalry, peasant crossbowmen and peasants with mixed weapons, etc. But they do have war carts, which are very useful indeed. And slightly odd in here, they've also got English and Scottish armies. So this is because it's not that well known, but Henry VIII did get involved in the Italian Wars. Now, he didn't go down to Italy, but he did invade northern France to support one side or another during the war, and won a major victory at the Battle of the Spurs as a result of that. So there's an army list here for if you wanted to play the English of the period, and also you can then use it for the Battle of Flodden against the Scots. So you've got again very similar formation. You've got gentlemen pensioners and the king's entourage, who are the heavy knights, mercenary Burgundian cavalry, demi lancers, various border reaver type cavalry there, Landsknechts again forming part of this, Gallo Glass, Boniacs, Irish Kerns, Marines, and sort of a bit throwback here, Bill longbow troops. So you can press gang your Wars of the Roses forces into this if you wished, which is kind of fun. And then the ordnance. There's your Scottish forces if you want to do Flodden. So again, Scots were indirectly involved in the Italian Wars. They invaded England to support France, and therefore you've got the army here. You've got men-at-arms, border horse, lowland infantry who are pike, because the Scots were trained by the French, and they sort of dropped their earlier traditional Schultron formation for a pike, for large squares of pike, with their in their case nobles and men-at-arms and those with better quality formed the front ranks, so they're allowed to do that within this formation. And then of course you've got the Highland levies and bowmen and what have you as well. Characters for them: James IV and Robert Bothwick. And then you've also got a Turkish army. There's a lot of lists in this book. Turkish forces didn't play a huge part immediately in the Italian Wars, but they were very active in this period. They fought against the Holy Orders, the Knights of St. John's in Rhodes, occupied large parts of North Africa, and pushed up to Vienna, but were unsuccessful in breaking into Vienna. And at one point the French actually allied with the Ottomans, which ruffled a few feathers, given the fact the French were obviously Catholic and the Ottomans Muslim. So you've got various army lists here. I won't go into detail on all of these, but you've got Tartars and various cavalry formations, the janissaries you'd expect, massed levies, irregulars, war carts and artillery. I might well repurpose some of my Napoleonic Ottomans for this, because they aren't a lot different. So then we're on to scenarios. We've looked through army lists, we've had the whole history of it. Now, I really like the scenarios in this book. I think it's almost a bit old school. And what do I mean by that? Well, you've got the battle details here, and there's some lovely battles, some really, really interesting battles. This one's sort of one of the early war battles between the League of Venice against the French. The French are sort of marching. Actually, they're going this way. They're marching across. They are marching this way. They're marching off to the right of the table, and the Venetians sort of are on the other side of the river and try and attack them. Not so well at the point. But rather than sort of giving you de facto army lists, because we don't really know a huge amount about what forces were involved, they tell you what to put in different battalion as points. So you can see here, Battalion 1, the Italian one, you can have up to 300 points divided between heavy horse, light horse, infantry and artillery. So it's up to the player to build the force based on what he has in his army, which I like. It's a bit old school. Generally these scenarios say, oh, you must have, 3 pipe blocks and 2 arquebusiers. That's it. It's up to you how you build your force within the constraints they give you, which I like a lot. So it's a bit old school. That's how scenarios often used to be back in the day. You can see here the vanguard made up of up to 300 points, which can be used to create gendarmes, French light cavalry, Swiss pike, Swiss crossbow armed infantry and artillery. So yeah, I like that. You've got this is a battle from the army of the Swabian League against the Swiss. Another one here between the French and the Spanish. Again, very clear maps, give you the setup. They're all designed to be played on 6x4s, which would be interesting to see how that works out. But yeah, very good indeed. Venetians against French. Again, kind of like them. They've got a lot of them have got different things arriving at different times, which is always fun to my mind. Battle of Ravenna, which has a French turf bank in front to defend against. So you've got there's Flodden if you want to fight that one out. This is between the Swiss and the French. So the next scenario is the sack of Brescia, which was a Venetian city in Lombardy in northern Italy. So this is a slightly unusual scenario. You've got the French coming in from one side, having to break through the earthworks and into the town, which means there's a whole section on siege battles, which I kind of like. I feel like we've been missing this from a number of the supplements up till now. So you've got various extra equipment you can have, grenades, siege engines, how to set buildings on fire. That will help make Martin feel very pleased. He likes setting buildings on fire. Heated shot, storming parties, obstacles, how to take out stone walls, city walls, that kind of stuff. Moving around the ramparts, sorties, etc. So a lot of interesting stuff. You've also got rules for mining, sapping under the walls and tunneling operations, and troops, I guess unit qualities for those sort of things, even down to fighting between different miners, so you can counter mining and all that kind of stuff going on. Really good. And then also very impressed with the fairly simple but very effective campaign that they've put at the back of the book. So this is it says here, playing as a standalone game can be fun in its own right. However, sooner or later you want to play more substantial series of scenarios as part of a campaign, and that's what they're giving you here. So this is this symbolizes the Duchy of Milan. It basically gives you the backdrop to play a campaign. How it gives you all the rules on how to set up your forces, the different armies involved, the points. Again, it's based on points. So it says ideally your force should be formed of an army composed of 800 points, and a raiding force of 400, and a patrol force of 200. You must include a general for each of the battaglia fielded, and you can't use any of the special personalities. Talks about different scenario actions that happened, etc. Different how the battle terrain will be set up when you fight each other, what the cost of victory and defeat is for the two sides, what happens with revenue from occupying from the cities, etc., etc. Really nice looking campaign, fairly simple, but I can imagine over the course of a few weeks you could play that out with your at least one of your buddies and get some interesting scenarios in the way. There's even down to random events, so peasant revolts, payday issues, etc., etc. And then finally at the back of the book, Charles gives a very comprehensive reading list of if you're interested in knowing more about the period, some recommended reading that sort of inspired him for this book, but also gives you something to read through. So very, very good book indeed. And then finish up with some absolutely stunning pictures once again. So there you go. That is Death and the Landsknechts, the new Warlord Pike and Shot rulebook. So there you go. The new Pike and Shot supplement for the Italian Wars. really interesting. Some very interesting rules in there that I think will really bring this period to light. If you've got this far into the video, thank you so much for doing so. Really appreciate if you can see your way clear to hitting the like button or subscribe if you haven't already done so. That would be tremendous. Let me know. Are you going to be getting this thing? Are the rules that excite you? I know there's probably many people who understand this period much better than I do, so apologies if I've made a bit of a hound on the on some of the histories, but yeah, I'm not an expert. I'm just an enthusiast, let's put it that way. Fantastic book, well worth your 22 quid, something like that, to buy at the moment. As I say, on pre-order. Very nice it is too. I can't wait to finish off painting up my Landsknechts, Swiss, Italians, might even do some French to allow me to play this period through. Thanks for watching. If you subscribe and hit that follow button, you'll see when I do put some games up of this and any other period that I play out. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well, and I'll see you all again soon. This is Dom, signing out.